Hi there, I'm mixed Anis Queen. My pronouns are she or anything you like, really. I am a white disabled person. I'm using a electric powered wheelchair, on the back of which is a pride flag, more inclusive pride flag that includes the new brown and black stripes. Today I'm wearing a pinstripe outfit. I've got a short back and sides and a little lilac fringe. I'm an activist in the disabled people's movement mainly. I also take part in some activism around marginalized sexualities and climate change. So I'm going to now pass to Anis. Anis, how would you introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Anis. My pronouns are they, and I identify as a intersex person, which historically was known as hermaphroditism and then got changed to intersex conditions, and then around in 2010 was changed to disorder stroke differences in sexual development, and then the new term is VSC, which stands for variations in sex characteristics. I'm from a South Asian background, and I always out myself as straight and heterosexual because there's an assumption that I get quite regular that because I'm a part of the LGBTQI plus community that I have to be in some way gay and trans, because people don't know what intersex is, and sometimes my orientation has been kind of ignored within queer spaces, so I always out myself because I think it's important. At the front of the table is the official intersex flag, which is yellow with a purple or symbol, but because I've not always been very welcomed or included in the intersex movement, I invented my own flag, which I'm wearing around my neck, which is purple and with a white circle, because I've been visually impaired from birth and was prescribed a special school, and I'm the sole survivor of infanticide in my family. My sister was born out in Pakistan and only lived for 6 months. I also have cousins in Pakistan who were born like that, in quotations, and their graves are unmarked. So had I not been visually impaired, gone to special school and born in the UK, I probably wouldn't be alive today. And infanticide isn't often discussed in the intersex movement. I'm a disability advocate since 2007. I also involved with race equality and challenging the honour-based system, and dabble in Stop the War, CND and climate change as well. And on the table is Izzy, the intersex red panda, who often gets misspecified as a fox or raccoon, and I've had them since 2015 when I went to the third intersex forum in Europe and met people like myself for the second time. The first time I happened to be volunteering at the Beijing School for the Blind in 2013, and I happened to meet intersex Chinese people who were giving a talk in Beijing at the time. So that's in 2013 I've met people, and I've known that I was intersex since 2002. This year marks the 20th anniversary when I first opened my bank, and the woman said, I have to open your bank as Mrs. Akhtar because it says female on your birth certificate, and my female marker was changed on the 11th of March 1989, and I was born on the 9th of January 1987, so I have 2 birthdays. Had that cashier not decided to open my bank as Mrs. Akhtar, I would have never known the truth about my birth. Thank you.
Anis, that was a really powerful start to your talk today, and it touched on some of the stuff that we will likely talk about to do with the abuse that people with intersex variations face, particularly in infanthood, but also starting with your lovely flags. So I wonder if we might tie those two things together. So I think pride is really important. Speaking as an activist from obviously mainly the disabled people's movement, we are often taught to hate ourselves and want to normalise ourselves and all that kind of thing. And one of the things that talking about pride does is help us kind of fight back against that and make ourselves whole again and become settled in who we are by being together. So what I'm going to ask you is, why is pride important to you as a person with intersex variations, and why do you think it's important to other people?
Yeah, in all honesty, I've never been to Pride in the UK, but I've had opportunities to be in Pride in Europe, and also was at Pride in Taiwan when for the first time intersex Asian people were together, and I was the odd one from the UK, but I'd always venture out to Asia because the intersex movement in the UK was very white women-led who appeared a certain way and were kind of sensationalised in the media and didn't really want to include me. So in all honesty, I've not been to Pride in the UK and would love to, and carry, hopefully, both flags. And towards the end of the talk, I will plug the several organisations in the UK, internationally, and in Europe, even though it's very likely when intersex people get asked, do you know a non-binary disabled person of colour who identifies as intersex, very rarely, if ever, will intersex people mention me, because as you may know, with a lot of movements, there's a lot of accolades, fandom and sensationalism, and somebody who identifies as neurodivergent with autistic traits, ADHD traits and dyslexia, I think people misjudge my online communication and view that side of me and don't often include me. So I'm very excited in Bradford, Leeds, Manchester, anywhere in the north. If a group of disabled people are going to Pride, I'd love to come along and celebrate. And I think Pride is very important to our communities.
That's a really good point, Anis. So what do you think about disabled people having a contingent in the Pride March this year, where you live or here in Manchester? We could do that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, and quite possibly even having a disabled Pride as in like celebrating disabled people. I think there's a learning disabilities or difficulties Pride somewhere down south, and we have like learning difficulties week, and I always encourage disabled people to kind of use opportunities like International Women's Week and Holocaust remembrance, with the black triangle that we kind of switched upside down into a pyramid shape, just like the pink triangle, and Human Rights Day and Suicide Prevention Day. These kind of days where we can knock on the doors of mainstream society and say that we exist, we are intersectional, that we're women, men, non-binary, old, young, people of colour, white people. We have all these different characteristics that we carry around with us all the time, and not to always segregate. But equally, I think it's important to have safe spaces where you can talk about disability, race separately, but at some point you've got to come together. When I was in Europe and we had the first Trans People of Colour conference, that conference I spent all my time either representing disabled people or people of colour, and I didn't even get to go to any workshops on intersex and trans because I was being pulled from these two communities. So we decided the next time Transgender Europe have a council that people of colour and disabled people will probably do stuff together, and it can be really difficult when you often have to pick and choose between different protected characteristics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so on that topic, Anis, and sort of in line with the title of this talk, which we were deliberately a little bit provocative with, do you ever feel a bit like a token or tacked on?
Although I first reached intersex people in 2008 on online forums, which predates Facebook, and I was automatically shunned and called a troll and pushed away, and I had a very bad experience with that. I think it's and then people began adding the I and the plus. I sometimes make the effort to say LGBTIQQA plus 2, which stands for two-spirited, because sometimes, non-binary and asexual people often feel excluded. And I think the common goal across the intersex movement, which I'm not actively involved in but sprinkle in all my other advocacy work, is that if you're going to add an I, then work with intersex people rather than just tacking it on. And although a lot of disabled people, we believe that the mantra "nothing about us without us" was something that we often started. It's been co-opted by other communities. So if you're going to add an I or even a plus, then please stop and think what that plus means, and often ask, who's not being represented in this room, whether that's a person of colour, whether that's people who add on to the LGBT acronym.
Yeah. So on to slightly more positive topics. You mentioned a European conference before, which I know was really meaningful for you. So I wanted to ask you, what memories do you have of important moments in your time as an advocate, or moments that have helped shape your work and your thinking and your politics?
Yeah, the most positive events have to be sort of meeting intersex people for the first time whilst I was volunteering out in China, and having that, even though language was a bit of a barrier because of me not speaking Chinese particularly well, only knowing a few phrases, but and people not knowing English well, that was really powerful. And then having an opportunity to speak at ILGA Asia conference in Taiwan as an disabled intersex Asian from the UK, and people respecting the fact that the UK intersex community wasn't particularly welcoming of me. I think some really important meetings were when Transgender Europe brought disabled LGBT people across the continent of Europe to look at writing a report about disability and LGBTI, and I was really proud to be the only participant, the only intersex participant, but also the only person of colour in the room, and I was able to contribute to that, and it was really powerful. At the time, I tried to contact organisations in the UK like Regard, but didn't receive a response. And then shortly after, ILGA Europe also did a disability and LGBT meeting, so I was happened to go to both of them in Europe. And I only had the chance to ever speak in the UK, apart from this, was at the Lincoln Conference in 2019, where I spoke about my intersectionality of having siblings with quite rare genetics, and how we've baffled the medical profession in Leeds why you've got 7 children with so many different things going on. Sadly, that was kind of ruined by intersex people whispering about me, which kind of upset me, but I didn't let that deter me. And that same year I spoke up at the Equality Network in Scotland. So I really appreciate this kind of opportunity, and those of you who know me know that I don't tend to really follow big names, and I think we should recognise people, and accolades are fine, but I'm somebody that shies away from accolades, fandom and sensational. I think that comes as a disability advocate, and knowing what the media can do and twist your words. And I don't, as somebody that has my family and has my disabled peers in Leeds, Manchester and Bradford, I'm very open about the fact that I don't actually have friends to sort of hang out with, and quite open about that loneliness. So I couldn't deal with being in magazines and all this kind of people wanting to know me or date me just because I'm some kind of icon. So I have my family to protect, and recently realising that my nephew's deletion syndrome, as of date, only 65 cases worldwide, that's 7.9 billion people, and intersex people often have to deal with that rarity. But I'm having to deal with things that are rarer than intersex. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a tough ride for people with rare conditions because you can sometimes be treated as a bit of an exhibit as well. And if that isn't bad enough that, you're marginalised everywhere you go. So, Anis, I know as well as you do, because I'm multiply marginalised, but perhaps not in as many ways as you are. I know that because you've worked in a number of different movements, as have I. I know that none of our movements are properly inclusive, and that is some work that we have to do in all of those communities. So what I wanted to ask you was, how do you think we can start to really properly collaborate so that everyone's work is more inclusive? I know a lot of us want to do it, but there's such a lot of tokenism, or like you say, sort of sensationalism, rather than people supporting each other and raising each other up together.
Yeah. Well, these 2 meetings in Europe, I kept drumming in, and I keep drumming this in. A lot of the work that I do now is that when you're disabled and LGBTI plus, you experience LGBT phobia from your disabled peers, and then you potentially disableism from your LGBT peers. So sometimes you have to then form your own group, and then if you throw people of colour into that, that's another layer. So I made this conscious decision to kind of remove myself from the intersex movement and no longer do social media, because I don't owe these people anything, but to approach the disabled people's communities in the north of England. And it was myself who learnt about the social model of disability when I trained as a peer support worker in Bradford in 2007. It was I in 2008 that was saying there's a parallel with the social and medical model, but not long ago, Crip Camp in the US featured intersex people, and I got halfway through it. I'm going to watch it again and get through it, and it's like, it hurts a little bit, because when you're trying to be a voice but ignored, but then a decade later, and then we have intersex people who aren't disabled themselves, who write papers and become published, and then it's like, hang about, you say nothing about us without us as intersex people, but then you go and speak on the behalf of disabled intersex people, and there's that kind of double standard. And I'm hoping to sprinkle it into the honour-based system, because although female was decided by the medical profession, my family fought hard to assign me as male because of the patriarchal kind of nature of South Asian and Muslim families. So working with Karma and Nirvana and Leeds and the honour system, not only to address the honour-based system regarding disabled people, but also LGBTI people, and with Change, which is a learning disabilities organisation in Leeds. We're part of a steering group that looks at the intersections of being LGBTI plus and having a learning difficulty, autism or neurodivergency, and they've added an I for that, and recently we've got somebody who identifies as asexual, so we're going to add an I, and hopefully going to be the first in the UK to have a easy read fact sheet on intersex. They have it in Australia, but Australia's kind of forward thinking, but there's quite a lot of racism in Australia as well. But I'm hoping we can have something in the UK. And one final point, I'm involved with a project with Exeter University that looks at infertility for people with VSCs, variations in sex characteristics, and we're going to have those pamphlets in easy read, so people are starting to realise there needs to be more discussions about these kinds of things and not exclude. And I think even though there are disabled intersex people out there, then often don't have as many intersections as myself, and as of yet I've not met anybody that's been segregated into special school, which adds another layer of segregation. And then I went to mainstream when I was 15. So, and what I found with disabled intersex people, like at the meeting in Denmark, when they did this mental health activity and put post notes around the wall, I asked people at the break time, was that accessible? And they said no. And it was almost like this handful of intersex European people who weren't people of colour saying, oh, you should bring it up, it's inaccessible. And I felt like on my own that I'm having to deal with the fact that I'm going to be replaced by a young non-disabled intersex person of colour who's going to become the go-to person for the UK. So I was dealing with that, let alone trying to advocate for my group, because I felt on my own. So I feel like I feel for disabled intersex people, being disabled is secondary, whereas for me, being disabled is something that I knew from the get-go, with like being registered visually impaired and prescribed special education. So I feel kind of on my own in that I will voice my access needs, even if it means not being invited to the next meeting. But it was really powerful in 2018 when I went to Transgender Europe's meeting that was just a general council meeting, and my mum passed away several weeks after that meeting. But being able to give, as best I can, eye contact to a white European intersex person and explaining how people who are neurodivergent may miscommunicate or come across as upset or aggressive, and try to respect people may be in breach of ground rules, not because they're trying to be a nuisance, but perhaps they're not being heard. And for people on the spectrum, we find socializing and reading social cues difficult, and there isn't any leniency. And just to wrap up that point is like, when you're a person of colour and you're trying to communicate on the internet and you're being told you're not intersex because you don't have the symptoms, you're not one of us, and then a decade later they welcome a person of colour who has big media outlets behind them, it makes you stop and think, was it because I'm neurodivergent? Why is there a double standard of like, a decade ago you reject me, but a decade later you accept a person of colour just because they have media behind them? And that really, really hurts. So, I decided that I'm going to focus on educating my disabled peers here in the UK, and maybe nip out to Asia every now and again. But I've given the intersex movement enough times, and I've stood up in front of 50 intersex people and apologised for my misconduct and misbehaviour, getting upset on Facebook. But that's what they were whispering about.
Did they make you do that? That's shit, Anis. Sorry.
Yeah, but
that's just shitty.
In 2009, and I realised that I broke ground rules, so I respect that. So I did that. I did that because I felt to make peace. But sadly, the following year when I spoke up at Lincoln, a white European intersex person told an Australian, just after I'd spoken for the very first time in the UK, oh, we had an incident in Denmark. And it's like, I've already apologised. Why do you have to like bring it up again? I've apologised. I've apologised. I thought we've moved on from that. So I don't really care if I never go to their big European gatherings. And I don't think it'll be a long time before disabled people have, the courage to say, hang on, this conference isn't
it's not accessible. Yeah.
Because I'm the one who will stand up for disabled people's access, even if it means not being invited to the big gatherings.
Yep. Yeah. No, Anis, I've been there too, and I think so. There's a few people in the room that have known me for a while and probably seen me do embarrassing things that they were not chuffed that I did, and at least in the disabled people's movement, there's been an element of forgiveness because of the understanding that I am neurodivergent, that I find behavioural rules very difficult to follow. I've had a night when I kicked off on stage where my entire set was a rebellion, and then I got drunk and left. Okay, some people in the room were there. They remember that night. I vomited later. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing with LGBTQI spaces that I've also found is it's very, like Sue Napolitano was saying earlier, and like you were just saying, disabled people aren't who they expect to see when they talk about a person who is queer or a person who is intersex. It's never us in their mind, and so they don't select disabled people. And that's why I think sometimes it's really important when we can get out there to kind of challenge that perception. So when I did some campaign work in 2008 in the BDSM community, and I went forward as a person that looked like a woman. At least I'm not a woman, I'm trans and I'm genderqueer, but that doesn't matter. To most outsiders, I look like a little girl in a wheelchair, and I was up there talking about extreme porn. I was not what anyone expected to see. They expected to see their idea of a dirty old man. And so I think sometimes it's really powerful when a disabled person represents for the whole community as well. But yeah, as soon as it's the disabled person, it's seen as, oh, well, that's a disabled thing. It's not a queer thing, it's a disabled thing.
Yeah, that's why towards the end I will run through some organisations, because even though I'm not welcome, and if there's talks going on, I'm the last person that anybody's going to invite. And I think when I did a talk on Instagram for a Black Beetle Health, which is a sexual health organisation, I think somewhere in Manchester or nationwide, that looks at kind of sexual health for people of colour, the woman that interviewed me said, how humble of you, even though you're shunned and excluded and not welcomed by the intersex community, you're still plugging their organisations, because I want people to have access to that information, because I don't have a website, I don't do social media or Twitter. And even on Saturday's meeting with the Exeter thing, I was very anxious to go there on Zoom. I always come a bit late because I don't want to do that whole how you're doing things. I don't really have a social life as such, so I feel very uncomfortable at that beginning part of like sharing about your life, because I don't really have much of a life outside activism and stuff. But
Me too.
but I avoid that. But I made contributions and I felt really proud, and my peers compliment, and that goes to show you about neurodivergency. I can't do it on written forms. I can't. You see an angry, upset, confused, hurt person on Facebook and Twitter because I'm carrying this crap around with me all the time. You might want to bleep that out. Crap around with me all the time. But in person, I'm quite articulate and quite charming and friendly. But that's the intersex movement and just the nature of online. If they're able to sell themselves and have thousands of followers on the internet, that's one way. That's why I much prefer on the ground grassroots, and people in Bradford are wanting to host me around Intersex Awareness Day, and I know that the LGBT Foundation, and I've got a lovely employer called PHM, you know where that is, don't you? Who have been really supportive and put tweets out for Intersex Awareness Day, and maybe in Manchester with the help of Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People, Leeds Disabled People's Organisation and the Bradford Disabled People's Forum. I don't need my picture plastered around the internet or get some kind of fame or whatever. I just want to make sure that locally and once I've done stuff in Leeds and Bradford, i.e. the NHS and council, I hope that I can do just to make sure. All I really want at the end of the day is when a baby is born like me in these cities, to go to those parents and say, would you consider not doing the surgeries? And just simple like that, just so that the next generation, but sadly, as you will know, as LGBT people or disabled people or whatever kind of background you come from, there's always a lot of fandom and sensationalism, and people get awards. Not to say that we should recognise people, and awards can be great, but the concept of inspirational porn is in the disability movement is this idea that these people are inspirational, and that anybody that doesn't aspire to this level is insignificant or less. And this is something that I don't think the intersex people like to say I'm envious, but I think had they had an understanding of how I was bullied on the internet and rejected and told of troll, they would have stopped and think, oh, it must be really difficult for Anis to have somebody here who's got a BBC crew and going to be very sensationalised and going to be pushed out. And my upset on Facebook during this Denmark meeting in 2017 I think it was the fact that as soon as I got back to the UK, I knew that perhaps the Londoner, New Zealand and Australian, these intersex 3 people who bullied me quite a lot on the internet, are going to say, oh, you could have been the first brown one in the UK, but you didn't. And people don't realise there's a difference between coming from a Pakistani Muslim background in the city of Bradford when you're in London, where you've probably got a hell of a lot more opportunities. And with my visual impairment and my brothers with things like Noonan syndrome and ichthyosis, very kind of niche, and I go to them family conferences and things, and I have to learn facts about their variations, and so my family and I could be very, very sensationalized if we wanted to, but that's not something I want, because it will just be a bunch of strangers who just want to follow me and be my fans.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
don't need that.
you want decent rights to be secured for people in the future, don't you? So Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People, as you know, but not everyone here might know, we're making a bioethics statement at the moment about reproductive rights. And one of the things we've asked for in there is for an end to involuntary, unnecessary surgeries on intersex people at birth, because we know that's such a massive issue, in favour of people making choices later. So just because we need to finish up in a second, two things. I'm going to ask you, what's your dreams for the future? And who are the people you want to plug, if there's any more that you haven't mentioned? And then we're going to go to the Q&A.
Yeah, that's fine. I just want to be able to do stuff locally in cities in the north and have opportunities to sort of educate people and raise awareness, and in time be able to speak to sort of NHS and councils to mark the awareness days and days of solidarity, and have safe spaces. Me personally, I'd like to be in a position where I can have a bit of a social life and actually have friends and explore things like dating and intimacy in my own time and space. And I will wrap up by plugging organisations. Intersex UK, Interconnected UK, i.e. ICON, OI Europe organisation, Intersex Europe, ILGA World, ILGA Asia, ILGA Europe, Transgender Europe, TGEU. They're great allies. Kaleidoscope, Amnesty. So these are some places where you can get information, and I've passed my details on to the LGBT foundation here, so hopefully can start doing things. I don't mind plugging intersex organisations because I think it shows inner strength that if people are going to treat me like crap and exclude me, I can kill them with kindness, I guess.
I really hope, at least, Anis, that now that you're properly kind of being embraced by friends in the disabled people's movement, that no one will ever put you in a position where you have to apologise for being neurodivergent again. Yeah, I really hope that. And if it ever happens, let me know, and I'll come and help you tell them to F off. If people, including people here, had not accepted some of the mistakes I've made, I would have given up on doing any activism probably 19 and a half years ago, because I make mistakes, and it's the forgiveness and understanding that means that I've become a stronger and stronger activist. And so let's hope that that's where you're moving towards.
And a quick response to that, the funny thing is, if you're having a neurodivergent person stand up in Denmark and apologise to 50 because you've got upset on Facebook because you're frightened of being excluded in future, but then that very person then whispers to another person, we had an incident in Denmark, then if I broke the ground rule of respect, then if you're a representative for the leading European umbrella organisation, then what respect are you showing me by kind of defaming me and bringing up something that I've supposedly been forgiven for? Yeah. So it's almost like a double standard that goes on.
That's just mean. That's just mean. So, Anis, before we start the Q&A, I'm just going to plug you first. So, for anyone that doesn't know, Anis is one of the curators for the Nothing About Us Without Us event that we're planning and organising, and we're really excited about that. And now I'm going to plug Regard and me a tiny bit. So Regard that Linda was talking about earlier, there's still an organisation. And so going right from its beginnings to like tonight, Regard has an event tonight. It's an online event. Nice one. Please come and join us. If you I will leave my details with somebody here to make sure everyone can get a link if they want it. But if you go to the Regard website, you'll be able to book in and get sent a link through their system. It's at 7 p.m. And I'm very lucky, I'm playing last. They only do it to me to see if I can sit still that long. It's difficult, is the honest truth. Thank goodness for Zoom now, we can turn the camera off. You can't see me fidgeting while I wait. But yeah, so I get to play at that tonight alongside Anne Carrad and Claire Summerskill, which will be really exciting. So please come if you would like that. It's all disabled and LGBTQI artists this evening. So that's a little plug for that. And then I guess we hand over now to you, if there's anything that you would like to ask Anis. Oh, we've got a mic.
Anyone? Thank you for the talk. So during that, what highlights to me is that a lot of the time you feel pulled and pushed into being one of your protected characteristics and being the token of that. How do you promote intersectionality without being tokenistic? How do you show that we're all multifaceted, we are all different in terms of neurodivergence, people of colour, abled or disabled, things in that regard? How do you build upon that we're all different without pushing people aside?
Well, I think I kind of approach each kind of intersection and then introduce the other intersections so that people learn. So like I recently became an ambassador for Karma Nirvana for the honour-based system, and then as a part of that I will be speaking about disability and LGBTQI+. I recently joined the Race Equality Network in Bradford and bring in disability and LGBT plus issues. And I've made the conscious decision that there's no point me even applying to these intersex things in Europe. I think I have a lot on my plate already, and now that I'm being vocal, I'm sure that peers will provide me opportunities with them. I feel so comfortable around disabled people, even if I'm feeling really, really sad. When I have a Zoom meeting with the GMD, the Manchester lot, it always cheers me up. And even on Saturday when I was feeling really anxious being amongst intersex people on Zoom with the project we're doing at Exeter, once I got in there and started talking about intersectionality, I think my peers respected me, and you know, it's a safe space, and I think the researchers have got to know me. And yeah, I think it's about picking your battles. I mean, I dabble in climate change and nuclear disarmament and stop the war, but not as much as disability. And people often say to me, are you sure you're not taking on too much? But I often say that because I don't have a social life as such, it's my pleasure to spend my evenings and weekends doing this kind of stuff. I you know, with work we have a WhatsApp group, and I might send a message in the middle of the night because I've just thought of something, but that's just a neurodivergent thing, because you know, equality, inclusion and diversity isn't a 9 to 5 thing for me. And all of us from grassroots movements, we kind of, you know, you might have a phone call with someone on a Saturday, because these things exist, and until people start asking and setting up meetings and inviting you, then it's quite tokenistic. But if I'm going to people and knocking on their door and saying, have you thought of these intersections, then I feel more liberated, because I'm then instilling this experience in those organisations rather than them setting up a group and things. So like with the event that Transgender Europe did, they paid us a fee, they covered our flights, but the following year when we had the council, at the very end, we all had intervention, and there's a clip of it on YouTube that I can send. So they spent all this money bringing disabled LGBT people together to write this report, but then they failed us at the council meeting the following year. So it's having that strength to challenge and people about, and I'd like to close by saying that everybody's intersectional, and I think when I had the chance of meeting a lovely Australian white woman who has links with Hong Kong in Cambodia, and she invited me to a talk down in London. She said it was very liberating to out yourself as a straight person within the LGBTI plus movement, but I also have privileges, and she was really shocked that I would say, I have this privilege of being an advocate and things, and she was very surprised for somebody with so many intersections to actually say that I have some privileges as well. Yeah. Privileges of a roof over my head, money to eat, yeah, and things like that.
Yeah. Am I on? Hello. That was a lot, and that was amazing. Thank you. Do you think one of the things I've learned is that we've got to get better at reaching out as well as inviting people in, and making connections outside our own spaces a bit. So going out, we do a lot, and this is one of the things I think we got wrong in the disabled people's movement, is we'll kind of open a thing and go, well, people should come, and then if they don't come, well, then we've tried and we don't need to bother anymore. And I think it's a question of not just sort of saying come on in, because it's very difficult to go into a space where you don't feel included already. But if we go out and connect with people more by trying to be decent allies and supporting other work they're doing, that helps bring people in, those personal connections. I think to some extent, would you agree?
Yeah, it's like thinking outside the box. So, intersex people may campaign for LGBTI, and they may, work within disability, or they may do race things. But I think, talking about infanticide and speaking to the honour-based system, because, I learned about being intersex in 2002 whilst I was starting mainstream school, like I've said to you. But as early as July 1999, when I was going through puberty on my own, and I saw my siblings flown over to Pakistan to be forced married, and then this abuse and stuff that they were going through by these arranged forced marriages, and I saw that being operated and assigned male and pushed into that whole sort of heterosexual kind of cis male kind of umbrella had everything to do with my family's religious background and stuff. So I tend to look outside the box and try to educate, and I'm hoping that eventually Carmen Ivana, which is a Leeds-based but nationally honour-based to challenge the honour-based system, start using their pronouns at the end of their emails and stuff. Little things like that, reaching out, because like at Transgender Europe's Council, if it's important to have safe spaces, but if we're only ever talking about disableism within our own community, then how can we expect non-disabled people to ever get it right? We need to have safe spaces to discuss stuff, also about racism, but then we need to be going out there. How can we address white privilege and white fragility if we're not actually speaking to white people and saying that, telling people? And when all the Black Lives Matter thing was, coming to international attention, people from my special school, I was on Facebook at the time, were like, I don't have white privilege, I'm disabled. And it was trying to educate people about colonialism and trying to, and it can be really exhausting because you trying to educate each intersection about the other intersection, and it can be really tiring as well.
Yeah, it does sound exhausting. But I think, yeah, that's a good tip, reaching out, and also not expecting to know it all. I think we always expect that we need to know it all and be able to already say. So I suppose it's about connecting with people and asking them. Like, as disabled people, we often say, just ask us. Stop thinking you need to know it all. Ask us what we need, and we'll tell you. Yeah.
And finally, I think it's important to talk about, like, in quotation marks, labour. So when the labour, as in like giving your time. So when people set up like horrible acronym BAME networks and stuff, and then people of colour are expected to do all the work and don't get paid for it and everything, and just remembering that I often think it's really liberating when organisations use some of their money to bring in. There's lots of companies out there, programs that you can do. If you're just utilising your volunteers, right? You're a volunteer, but can you also come and talk to us and do everything about LGBT and people of colour, when there's other external companies that you could fund or bring in, and then invite that person to come in and talk. I just want to point out that when I was at university trying to be a student, I was asked if I would be the first intersex rep at Liverpool Guild of Students, and they've not had a rep, but shortly after they decided to host an intersex awareness event and get 2 people to come in externally, and my knee-jerk reaction as a neurodiverse person who gets quite upset was like, hang about, why are you needing to invite external speakers when you've got me? Oh, this is to benefit people like you, and this is the LGBT Society's very first intersex event. We don't want you to ruin it. If you come, you can't ask a question or comment. And it was this gatekeeping of like, you'd think that you should utilise your own students and staff first and give them a platform. And I was really polite and said, can I introduce them? Can I also out myself as intersex persons to carry on? I'll meet you in the middle. But it was almost like, we don't want you to ruin this event. And like, how can you hold an intersex event just because somebody's got a BBC documentary and accolades and all this? And I don't mean to be people to think I'm envious, but it's just but I think I'm grateful for being a disabled person, because this kind of placards with like saying things like I was lonely and I thought I was unloved, this kind of overcoming and survival story, that's not something I do as a disabled person, so let alone doing it. And the only article you'll find of me is in Bangkok Post. I was volunteering at Bangkok School for the Blind, and it was Ida Hot at the time, and the woman interviewed me, and she used a picture of me with my hands in my face, and the tagline something, Anis comes to term with tragedy or something. And it was like, that's why I would avoid the media. And the reason I was going out to Asia was because I used to have a dream of wanting to be Dr. Anis Akhtar of Disability Studies with a specialism in East Asia, but sadly certain colleges and universities have kind of banned me or excluded me because when I'm upset, I tend to kind of breach codes of conduct, not because I'm a bad person, because I'm not being heard. So I don't know, I'm 56 grand in debt to student loans already, and I'm 35 years old, and I don't think I'll ever go to uni, and it pisses me off when universities do research on disabled people and intersex people. And I won't name universities, but some of my disabled peers said, get yourself an advocate, and my advocate wrote to student cases, wrote to Equality Diversity. I've been in touch with the Students' Union, and she's closed my case. And a part of me knows that firing off an angry email isn't going to help things, but there's only one Russell Group university in the country that's doing both disability and intersex, and I happen to live in that city, and I can't even go anywhere near the university because of my anxiety and fear. And it's sad when a rich, powerful university that has this reputation for intersex research and disability research isn't prepared to even listen to somebody about what circumstances they may have had when they miscommunicated with a student. And that's the elitist nature of this. But I'm also grateful. If I'd never gone there as a member of public to try and get experience and been banned from the campus, I never would have left my family and travelled all the way to the northwest to try and get a degree from 3 different universities, all at which I got put on fitness to study and, you know, judged. And every time it was like, I want to speak to equality and diversity, I want to speak to your student services and bring about change. And it was always like, you're here to get a degree, not go to conferences and meetings. And it was even cheeky when a head of sociology said, you know, you're here to pass a sociology degree, not be an activist. And it was like, yeah, so I don't have the best. I'm hoping that even though my advocate has closed the case next September with an amazing reference, and if I can get to know councillors and MPs, that there can be enough attention, because I used my life savings to volunteer in China, Malaysia and Thailand, and went to 3 conferences because I wanted to research and support disabled people in the Far East. And if this prestigious Russell Group snob university wants to profiteer off my life, then at least, you know, give me a chance to apologise and explain some of the circumstances. When you're pleading with a social worker, a mental health nurse, saying that you're not feeling very well and that you're likely to upset someone, and then a year later you then upset someone and not welcome at a university anymore, perhaps there's something to be said about the medical professional letting people down and not supporting people. So yeah, I thought I'd share that with you because I think it's important to realise that I think student unions are guilty of inviting the famous intersex people, and I think universities are wanting to do research and invite the famous ones again. And I don't come from a space of envy, but I come from a place of hurt and being excluded and silenced by the very people that are meant to understand me and be like me. So,
we don't need heroes. We need co-conspirators. We need peers who make us feel stronger. That by being together, we feel our power grow. It's just so opposite to what we really need. Just to go a little bit back in that tip, one of the things you said there I thought was really important, and sometimes is also as volunteers, because I'm a volunteer as well. There is an endless amount of work to do for free. And one of the things we do need to do sometimes is pay for it. If we can get the funding, we pay for the advice. So at Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People, we've been working with an organisation called Rivers Coaching, and they've been really helping us develop our intersectional work and our approach. And they've been amazing. So, should we check for more questions or close up?
I think if anyone's got one more question, we could do that, but then we'll finish.
Sorry, my mind went. I can't really organise my thoughts very well. It's just.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Is anyone? And it's all right if there's not.
With intersectionality being a problem in a lot of these sort of advocacy groups, do you think it would be better to create new advocacy groups or to amend the currently existing groups to make them more intersectional?
Ooh, that's really interesting. I think a bit of both. I'm a member of Alfie's Alliance for Inclusive Education, great organisation, and they have a Black Disabled Lives Matter. And even though the last meeting was meant to be like a social thing, I couldn't help myself being amongst disabled people of colour, and like all of it coming out like this. Very, very positive stuff, but people then took it on board. So Yeah, I think there's pros and cons. Yes, you should be knocking on the doors of other organisations and saying, be intersectional, but then there might be a niche where you need to set one up. But when you set up another organisation, that's more labour, you know, you have to then create it. And then also this idea of dilution. So, I don't know if that's a real word, but this idea of dilution. So, if I'm going to set up some kind of disability, queer, colour kind of organisation, then it's diluting that thing, and then people then are having to choose between, do you get where I'm coming from? And it becomes quite a difficult, I find it hard enough to juggle between Bradford, Leeds and Manchester, let alone trying to create something. But I think it's also about welcoming people in, and I think the best thing you can do is seeing who's not represented, and to plug our exhibition and our community creators. One sat in the audience as well, and when we're doing the exhibition, a lot of us are talking about which groups aren't being covered, because we want to try and encompass sort of pan impairment. So I think it's finding a middle ground. Yes, going to other organisations to educate them on intersectionality, but maybe setting up other groups. But when you set up groups and new initiatives, that can be taxing in terms of time, money and funding, and people's energy levels as well.
Yeah, that's what you meant. Is that what you meant about dilution, like diluting our campaigning energy, spreading it out even further?
Yeah. People criticise me of spreading myself very thin and being involved with lots of organisations, but that's why when I contribute at meetings, I bring a different perspective, because I have all those different things going on at once. But it's just it's hard to, with minority, I think it's hard to maintain groups with funding and, people power and all that kind of stuff. So it's almost like creating more work for yourself. That can be quite, then you've only got yourself to blame because you're creating more work for yourself.
Thank you, Anis. Thanks so much.
Cool. And thank you both so much, Should we have a round of applause?